And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction. Welcome to the No Direction podcast, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
It's finally here, Perram.
They're not going to know what episode they're on if we keep opening with that, Ryan.
I know. All right, we're talking about the Lost Omens World Guide today. The Lost Omens World Guide is the first quote-unquote campaign setting book. In fact, let's start right there, Perram. Let's go right into it. It is a 100 and something odd page book.
Yeah, it is a thin book. Our Starfinder fans that are also Pathfinder fans are probably used to books that look like this now.
Yeah, so we're talking about 140 pages, which is a fraction of the bestiary, and even smaller fraction of the core rulebook.
I know.
And the idea is that if you see Lost Omens on the cover, it's a campaign setting book, expected to be a little smaller, but if you're coming from first edition, this is huge compared to a player's guide or even a campaign setting book.
Yeah, it feels so light in the hand. I'm just after lugging around the bestiary and the core rulebook, just grabbing this is almost like refreshing.
This actually is refreshing our opinions of what a campaign setting book is, because this is the introduction to what this Lost Omens line is like. Right. So, Perram, you are more familiar with the campaign setting side of the Paizo publishing world and of Pathfinder. There we go. You're more familiar with the campaign setting side of Pathfinder. So how would you define what a Lost Omens blank guide is?
A Lost Omens blank guide is what happens when you take a campaign setting book and then blow it up and then sprinkle in player companion. But we only have, this one is way more on the campaign setting guide. But the previews of what we were seeing with the Lost Omens character guide definitely leans more towards the player companion side of things. But this one here, this very much is a campaign setting book. So if you're used to those 64-page campaign setting books, that's basically what you got. You got two of those stapled together here.
What's interesting to me is that as a campaign setting book, it's largely a retread. As a rule book, it's largely new content. This is the first we're seeing of non-core rulebook archetypes and just what other directions the second edition rules can go. And I say it's a retread, and it's a summary of what Golarion is with an update to the timeline based on the campaign, the adventure paths, as though they had concluded.
Right, and just trying to find out exactly who this is for is a very interesting exercise in the game, because this definitely, if you're getting started with 2E, I guess this is the only 2E definition of what the world setting is. But this is a book that they've made several times before. They've made, one of the very first books they did was the Pathfinder campaign setting hardcover, which was printed on newsprint and very thick, very reminiscent of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting guide, if you remember that from the 3rd edition days.
I do. I actually had it. It was the only 3rd edition campaign setting book I had.
It's like the gold star standard that I compare campaign settings to. That book was just so well put together, and that it's basically set the bar for all other campaign setting books as far as I'm concerned. And
it had the Cosmopolitan feat. That's why I remember it.
Now, it also, they made the Inner Seaworld guide, which was basically the actual Pathfinder version of that book, because after that one went out of print and got stupidly expensive and hard to get. And then they've also done an Inner Sea Gazetteer and an Inner Sea Player's Guide. I'm trying to remember what that last one was called. Not the Gazetteer, but there was another one that was a 64-page...
Primer?
No,
the Primer might have been a player guide. There might have been another book in between the Primer and the Gazetteer.
Right. So there was a 32-page softcover version of this, and then there was a 64-page softcover version. Both of those were kind of aimed at getting players into it. And now we have the 120-some page version hardcover of it. And this is a book I've read a few times now. So it was really interesting going through it again. And I think I know who this book is for. This is a book for learning about Golarion for the first time, or quick reference for something in Golarion you're not familiar with. This of all the books, I have to say that this is the most enjoyable read through. This is the most like sit down on the couch and read it friendly version of those books.
No, okay, of those books. I was
Mhm.
just going to ask you to define what you mean by of all the books.
Of
Go on.
all the versions, because the bigger, thicker books were very dense, very full of content. And also all the books did it by alphabetically, and we talked about Luis about like, wait, that might be confusing. This defines the inner sea region, basically Avestan and Garund, in like 10 major regions of countries that are kind of near each other and influence each other and sort of have the same theme. And using that sort of metric, it actually made it easier for me to conceptualize where these countries were and what they did, and more understand like why Brevoy matters, because this is like politically upturned fantasy land. Why is this different from the other politically upturned fantasy land? And it's like, oh, this is the one of the few established areas in the north where they have a limited access to trade route. Therefore, they're incredibly influential. And the fact that they're having political turmoil has repercussions for the entire region. Whereas Taldor's just, always in trouble. So, yay, Taldor. Yeah. And because of this has the regions, it makes it easier to read. The little sidebars are probably my favorite part again, because it's like, and let's take a time out from reading about another country to introduce this tiny little fact, or this person, or this little bitty rule snippet. I'm really a big fan of how they're doing the sidebars in these books. And basically, it's just an easier, lighter read. But if you are like, I know Galarian, I know it inside and out, and I contribute to the Pathfinder wiki blindfolded backwards with one hand tied behind my back, this book isn't going to tell you a whole lot except for how things were updated now that they've resolved all the adventure paths.
Except for the crunch.
Yes, there is also crunch in this book. It's not a lot of crunch, though. Every one of the 10 regions basically has a 2-page spread of crunch, usually a whole bunch of backgrounds, and then an archetype, which the archetypes are super important because it's our first peek, like you said, of archetypes that aren't multi-class. And also, usually there's 1 or 2 bits of crunch sprinkled in the pages beforehand, usually like a magic item or something in the sidebar or something like that.
Perram, this kind of started like a summary, and I feel like we've already touched on most of the major talking points. Like, well summarized.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's fine. You did a very good overview of the book. There's a couple of points I want to make that just feel nitpicky now, which I suppose is to be expected. But one thing I do want to bring your attention to, is that this is not the first time a second edition player will be introduced to Galarian. There was a chapter in the core rulebook.
Oh, yeah.
Which, at this point, is that chapter so forgettable and redundant with this book being out so soon after, and basically taking anything that's in there and blowing it up?
Like those 10 pages are.
Yeah, of course. The core rulebook is not redundant, but you and I were not fond of that chapter. Even you as you questioned its importance. And it just feels like now it's even clearer that, boy, they didn't need that.
I mean, I guess there's people that aren't going to buy this, and it might be a lot of y'all, because it's on back order right now. If you try to go buy it from Paizo's website, you are going to be waiting a little bit. So if you see it at your local store, you might want to pick it up if you're thinking about getting it in hardcover. If you don't have this, then the core rule book, I can see why they justified it, but like the second I picked this book up, those 10 pages became like, not the whole chapter. The whole chapter had like gods and stuff and very important stuff. This doesn't go into a lot of religion at all.
That's true.
There's like, I expected there to be like a religion of Galarian, but that evidently that's being saved for later books, like the character guide and the gods and magic book specifically.
I was going to say, it's probably in the gods and magic book that was already announced.
Right. And so that sort of stuff is like later, but this book here doesn't touch on that at all. So those pages are still relevant, and they're always going to be relevant, because the gods part especially you're going to want as a quick reference for any of the religious characters. And whereas this here, the little major regions area, this just completely makes that pointless. But I understand why it's there. We went into this already, during the core rulebook review.
Yeah, but it does bear repeating it just because of how you'd clearly forgotten that chapter exists when you were talking about it.
Yeah.
All right, let's start on the cover.
Yay!
Gorgeous cover. Yep. Really clever.
Oh, how clever? Why is it clever?
Well, cause you got Sela Valeros and Fabis, who are not characters on the cover of the core rulebook, so it's cool that across the hardcovers we've already got 6 of our iconics.
Sela's on the cover. Oh, I know where this is. I know where in Galarian this takes place.
Okay. Where in Galarian does this take place?
Hell Not Hill.
Okay. So is it obviously this is from the new adventure path, the Age of Ashes?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So the reason that I think it's clever is that on one cover, you've got 3 different views of what you can find in Galarian. Each has a strong color choice. Each has a strong geographical idea. Like one of them just looks like hands are ripping out of some red hellscape. Then you've got this high-tech, well, maybe not high-tech, but definitely advanced clean city. And then finally, you've got the wilderness. And they're all kind of leaking into this one room as though like, this is Galarian. It's anything. It is the kitchen sink setting you need it to be. And it's not all represented on the cover, but it's such a smorgasbord on the cover that you get the idea that Galarian is not any one thing. Lost Omens World Guide represents much more than just any one cut of fantasy.
Yeah, and it's also worth calling out that this is mostly talking about Aveston and Garoon, the continents that would traditionally be the inner sea continents. This does talk a little bit about Arcadia and Tian Sha and in the other continents, but it does not go into very much depth. They get like a paragraph, 2 paragraphs each.
So that was going to be the nitpicky thing, that the Pathfinder campaign settings always had an issue with the word world, because this is not a world guide. This is an inner sea guide, but they couldn't call it the inner sea guide because inner sea was kind of synonymous with, like, it was the subtitle of the first edition campaign setting, whereas Lost Omens is a subtitle of the second edition campaign setting. So this is the Lost Omens Inner Sea Guide, which if you're not already invested in Pathfinder, you don't know what that means. Right. So I get why they chose something other than Inner Sea Guide, but I always have an issue with the titles of the campaign setting broad books. They never seem to be exactly what, like, the content and the titles never seem to quite align.
Right. Now, for most people though that are going to be adventuring in a pre-made campaign setting, this is pretty much all you need, because those other continents, like Tian Sha is the only one of them that is fleshed out. Like Arcadia's got like a few articles recently, and a couple of the adventure paths touch on it. That's kind of
the Tyrant's Grass, I believe, is the one.
Tyrant's Grass, Aeons, Strange Aeons touches on that a little bit too. There's a few of the others, and like some PFS stuff, but like this is pretty much all of the world that has been defined except for Tian Sha.
You ready to crack the spine?
Let's crack it.
So after the table of contents, and
there's a very important thing that you're not seeing because you don't have a hardcover. You only have the PDF.
That's right. I'm working off a PDF.
When you crack the spine, the first thing you see is this. The map.
Now, is it perforated? Like, are you not taking that out because that would destroy your hardcover? Oh!
Nah, it's got the little glue dot thing.
Oh, okay. How's the map? I assume it's the map from page...
It is that map.
12?
It is that map, but
11.
It's like... I've seen a high-res image. You get this with the PDF. This map has many, many more labels. It's basically... You know how they have, like... When you go to a region, they have, like, the little zoomed-in part of the region that has, like, a dozen labels on it? It's as if all of those were stitched together. So the one on the page that we've seen in the core rulebook, you've seen online, and you've seen like in the opening pages of this book, it has the major labels, but this goes all the way down to the little nitty gritty. I'm totally getting this framed and hanging it up right there behind me on the wall there.
But it's reversible.
Happening. I know! This is bad. This is bad. Because the backside of it is the coolest part of it. And I know, but the backside of it has a version of the map that your characters might have, because it's
Yeah,
more
the
hand
topography version.
painting. It's got topography. It only has like major labels. It doesn't have a whole lot of smaller labels. This is like the in character version of the map.
So I asked if it was the map from page 11, and it's actually neither side is that. One side is that same content, but much more stylized and fancy. Then the other side is much more information. So effectively, you have 3 versions of the map, 2 of them on that poster, one of them on page 11. So like it fits different needs. I like that.
And there's one more version of the map that now is super not like there's the other super major cool version of the map they made a few years ago. That was
gigantic
like
one, yeah.
4 panels you had to put together. I never did get that framed and put on my wall like I wanted to. I guess I'm glad I didn't now, because I'm going to have to replace it with this. No, not that I'm happy about having to do that, but it is what it is.
You've got a lot of walls, Perram.
I know, but it's kind of silly to have 2 of the same map, especially when one's out of date.
Is it out of date though? I mean, all right, I guess the borders are pretty much the same, but I guess how we categorize and think of things has changed.
Right. So, and that major regions is such a useful tool in helping me conceptualize and communicate what the different countries are. Just that little subdivision, that I kind of want that to be easily there and referenced by my players. Like you're in the, oh gosh, I'm missing all of them.
Golden Road.
Golden Road, yeah. It's the only region that has a sea in the middle of it.
The Golden Road?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it does. Okay, yes.
Like a literal body of water sea right in the middle of it. But it's like, it's Kadira and Assyria and then a few of those other regions that around there. It's like a lot of the commerce comes from that region, which is why it's called Golden Road. And it's also got sand and pyramids and cool Arabian pony riders that kill things with scimitars. Awesome stuff.
So I do agree with you. These regions are they're cleverly named, which really does sell what they are, and they are handy dividers. It does impact how these chapters work, though, and we'll get into that as we go not chapter by chapter. We're not going to do that, but as we go into the layout of a chapter, the anatomy of a chapter, you'll see what I'm talking about. But every chapter starts with this 2-page spread that is super useful. It's got the detailed map of the zoom in of the region, so that you've got more than just the major cities outlined. And then it's got national flag. It's got a list of the peoples and the languages you will find there, significant factions that play a role in the area, religions by symbol with their names included, and resources. Again, it's symbols and words. I know I complained about some of the symbology in the core rulebook, but the symbology in this book is amazing.
It it's my
is extremely clear. It's beautifully laid out. It really, if you only had the opening, let's say they put out a primer and it was just these opening spreads, you would get so much information about what to expect in this region of the world. And the art, which is across 2 pages, it's panoramic, is a street view of that region or of a location in that region. So it really gives you, this is how your characters feel when they are stepping into this region. So the art direction of these 2 pages, absolutely spot on. I would even say perfect.
Yeah, when we saw this at PaizoCon, I think I gasped and cheered on stream. So I was super glad to see it in person. And this is also an area where I'm really glad I have the hardcover, because when I was just paging through this casually, reading in my chair and just enjoying this book and kind of just like losing myself in Galarian, and then I would flip to one of these pages and then I would just be instantly see this massive, huge 2-page spread picture of a landscape of the region. It just immersed me straight into it, and that is an experience that you can't get flipping through the PDF.
It's true. I'm sitting here just kind of tabbing back and forth, jealous of the hardcover you have.
I know. I love it. I loved all the Pathfinder books so far, but this is like the one that I've gone back to again and again just to read for fun, even after reading it once.
after that, the pages are actually laid out similar to the bestiary in that you've got an outside column, which takes up a third of the page, and then an inside column, which is 2/3 of the page, and actually the bulk of the text. And this is unusual. You don't usually get a massive column that big, but it does draw the eye to this is the significant text, which is usually in black font, and then the sidebars is a brownish font, and so you do look where the book wants you to look, and the sidebar is something you can make a mental note of, like, I'm going to go back and read that, or I'm going to go back and forth once I finish a section. I would not have expected this to be as easy to read as it ended up being. So that's, again, a very good formatting choice on the part of this book and the people in the layout department at Paizo.
I'm showing page 100 from the old Cheliac spread as an example. This has got the notable political figures, which is really cool to have, to be able to put faces to these leaders in the regions all at once when you're going through here, because then you can sort of personify these people in your mind as these are the people that are influencing all the decisions of the region. On the left, that's a great sidebar. And then on the right, next to the really cool devil art, it talks about infernal contracts as one of the side things, which is super important if you're in old Cheliacs to know about how contracts and devils work.
Yeah, there is a bit of a formula to the sidebars in that the chapters will start with a timeline, and it's just significant dates relative to that region. And this is usually where you'll get the sum up of the adventure paths and what's been happening since. And then you got notable figures. I believe it's always 4, and it tends to be people from all across the region, so you won't have too many people in the same faction or whatever in that region, because the regions are varied in their content, even something like old Cheliacs. And then you start getting this is the important snapshot information. So you were talking about the infernal contracts. That's not so much formulaic as it is like, and now here's what's really important. So when you're flipping through and you just want to get an idea for this, it's almost the same as the visual, except it's just here's a chunk of important information followed by chunks and chunks and chunks. So, and then relationships and economics are in each of the chapter. Yeah. So it's really clever. And the reason I think that you were drawn to that is because it's really like summarizing the most flavorful part of the flavor of that region. And that's why it's like, it's not to say that the main content is dry, but it's just this is the most impressive thing that you will know about that region. It's a really good way of doing this.
Yeah. One of my favorite call-outs taught me something of Galarian I didn't know, which is the 6th king of the 5 Kings Mountain. It's one of the sidebars on page 127 over in the Shining Kingdoms area, which has like this really cool like picture of the guillotines over in Galt here. And it talks about how there's the 5 Kings Mountains, but there's a 6th king. It's the great red worm Duralathskull, who has been asleep for about 2,000 years and he's due to wake up. And that's probably going to be absolutely disastrous for entire continents when that happens.
And then finally, before we get to the last 2 pages of the spread of the chapters, somewhere in there you have about a 50 to maybe not 50, maybe 100 or 200 word crunch that is relative to the region. So here in what section are we in here? It's the one with ears in the Saga lands. You've got the spell Snowball, whereas
Snowball is back, baby.
The infamous spell that came from one of the campaign setting books, so it's super appropriate that it showed up here rather than the core rulebook.
Let's read Snowball, because this is the new infamous Snowball. Their audience needs to know about Snowball.
Tell us about Snowball, Perram.
You throw a magically prepared and chilled ball of dense snow. The target will take 2d4 cold damage and potentially other effects depending on the result of your roll. Critical success. The target takes double damage and a -10 foot status penalty to its speed for a round. Normal success. Full damage, 5 foot status penalty to its speed. They unnerf Snowball, Ryan. They unnerf Snowball. It heightens 1 for 2d4 up as long as you want.
So does this still feel like Snowball to you?
Yes. When they nerfed Snowball in first edition, they nerfed all the add-ons and left the damage, which, the nerf had to happen. It was like a conjuration spell that was better than any evocation spell. It had to happen. This is back to being an evocation spell, which is what they changed with the nerf. But when they nerfed it, they took away the slow and the cool parts of the spell, which is when I throw snow spells at people, I'm wanting to do more than just damage. I want to freeze people, slow them down and stuff, and they took that away. And now they added it back. But of course, it does less damage than other damage spells. And that's the change I wish they would have done. I wish they would have made Snowball do a lot less damage and kept the slow in first edition. So this makes me happy.
Finally, the last 2 pages of every chapter are full on crunch. First, you've got backgrounds. You've got, I think it's like 8 to a dozen every single time, and it covers the region very well. You will find, if there's something that region is known for, odds are you will find a background, and they are usually broad enough that it's basically just your background is this region with a little bit more. So like we've got Children of the Puddles. That is the flooded quarter of Absalom. So if you grew up there, so instead of just being like, you are from the puddles, they had a little flavor to it, making it a little more distinct. I can tell you that after reading this book, I'm ready for a break from backgrounds.
Yeah.
They are like traits, except far more formulaic. So there's really only so much you can do with backgrounds. This book needed them. This is the core rulebook had a whole bunch of backgrounds, and I really liked how they were implemented. The formulaicness of them is actually a strong suit, but it does, after reading 2 books in a row with this many backgrounds. Okay, now let's look at some of the other ways that we can explore the rules of 2nd edition.
Now, I want there to continue to be backgrounds in small doses when appropriate, because when they talk about other regions, I want to have backgrounds for having characters from those regions. And when they talk about religion, when we get to gods and magic, I want some backgrounds that tie into the specific gods. But but you're right. We need some more crunch content that is not like 50 billion more backgrounds. Because this has more backgrounds than the core rulebook.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. And there's nothing groundbreaking. It's the same thing. You will get 2 ability scores to choose from for one of your 2 ability boosts, and then 1 generic. You will get a specific skill, a lore skill, and then a skill feat.
Right.
Every single time, I believe, without exception.
Well, there's a couple of exceptions. The Pathfinder agent cheats a little bit by getting the skill feat that turns into just more skills. So basically,
that would be the Pathfinder Hopeful.
The Pathfinder Hopeful. So if you take the Pathfinder Hopeful, you're just basically saying, give me all the lore skills you can give me, which is appropriate.
It is. It's still a skill feat.
I know, but it kind of...
So the closest it comes to breaking the rules is to choose the skill feat that does something else that backgrounds already do.
Right. There's some really flavorful ones, though. I really like the one from the Impossible Lands. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's where you were in Numeria and you tasted some weird Numerian alien fluid and you're just chasing that high for the rest of your life.
I don't believe that's the Impossible Lands. No, Numeria is in the Broken Lands.
Oh, the Broken Lands. Sorry. I'm trying to look up what that is, but...
The Wonder Taster. Wonder Taster.
So you get alchemy lore and stuff because you're just basically brewing and trying to get that same stuff you tasted that one time once.
You get crafting. You're trained in the crafting skill, alchemical lore, and then alchemical crafting is your skill. So it really shows you are focused. You have one area of expertise, and it is trying to make this strange brew.
Yeah.
And then finally, every single chapter has an archetype. And archetypes are laid out in, you've got the dedication feat, which gives you a small bonus, but mostly it unlocks the other archetype feats, which you can spend your class feats on. A good mix of some super flavorful ones. Like I've got the Aldori Duelist here, which is we were always complaining when the Sword Lord was something you can do from first level, because it feels like an Aldori Sword Lord should be something spectacular and prestigious. So the Duelist is the people that admire the Sword Lords, but they are on the first level basis, or second level, I guess, because when you can get the feat, which I like. And I know that when we reviewed the core rulebook, I was like, I can't see myself playing the fighter. I think I can see myself playing the fighter so that I can play the Duelist.
Yeah, the Duelist is kind of fun. It's got the parry. It's got Saving Slash, which is its 10th level feat that it's a reaction where you attempt to put your blade in the way of a crit you just got to turn it into a normal hit. That visual sells that whole class to me.
There is another one I want to call out. I believe it's the one from the Impossible Lands. The monk-like one.
Oh, the Student of
Yes,
Perfection.
Student of Perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So,
going to pull that up on screen.
What this does is it shows one of the strengths of how second edition rules synergize. Because one of the things about first edition is that if you found two options that thematically worked well together, odds are mechanically they were redundant. Whereas second edition has been a lot more aware of that. And so it's things like if you choose a background that gives you a thing related to your, or that you also get in your class, you can just choose another skill to be trained in. Like it takes into account that if you're building to a theme, then odds are you're going to get the same options multiple times and accounts for that. And so this is the Student of Perfection looks like a monk archetype, but if you're a monk, it feels like it goes one direction. And if you are a non-monk who wants to kind of train like a monk, it goes in a different direction. And I like that a lot. I like how it feels like the way you enter into this class that feels like it should be one specific class's prestige class, but or archetype. It's still the flavor. The mechanics account for how you are taking it in and doesn't limit it to just one area.
Yeah. Also, speaking of how you take these classes, this is also showcasing the rarity system in Pathfinder 2, because each of the archetypes are uncommon, which means that you have to have your GM's permission to access them, but they always have the access trait. So if you meet the prerequisite of the access line on any given item in Pathfinder 2, you get to treat it as if it is common. So if your character is from Jalmari, if you say, when your background, my character is from this area, then this Student of Perfection becomes a common thing that you can take without GM permission.
Now, there's one, I wouldn't call it an exception, but there was an oddity for me. And that is the Living Monolith dedication. This is on page 59. We were talking about this when we had Luis and Eleanor on. So it has a feat at 4th level called the Cawstone Ritual. This feat is rare, and you do not get access to this feat as written from the Living Monolith dedication. And all other Living Monolith feats have the Cawstone Ritual as a prerequisite. So I don't know if the intent is you're supposed to unlock the Cawstone Ritual, or if it being rare shows, because this is also probably the most powerful archetype in the book. It gives you all kinds of damage reduction, all kinds of
you get
super defenses.
You get stone melding.
Yes, you get a lot of cool things. So I am curious to see a little bit of follow up about why the Cawstone Ritual is rare and how you gain access to it, because the rules don't actually tell you how. Which is one of the things about the rarity system, in that I've explored the rarity system because it looks to me like it's something that should be super codified, but it's not. It's super guideliney. And it comes to an area like this where I guess as the GM, I just can say yay or nay to this, or I'm supposed to reserve this for NPCs. I'm not sure. I hope that we get a little more direction about how the rarity system can be implemented.
Yeah. I mean, I'm imagining that's something we're going to be able to see in the future, because they really seem to be pushing this concept out there.
Well, and this book mostly uses it very well. So, because not just anyone can be an Aldori duelist. These are things that are, precious to that land and to those people. So it makes sense that it's like, here's rules that are out there, but don't just show up and say like, I'm from Galt. No, not. Can you be from Galt and be an Eldori? No, where is Galt?
Galt is over in the Shining Kingdoms.
Okay, so then you can't just be like, I'm from Galt, but I like Eldori duelists, so I'm going to be an Eldori duelist. If you do that, you have to at least talk to your GM about it, because the access line is the second stage of prerequisites to change that uncommon into a common.
And that pretty much sums up what this book is.
So there was something I was hinting at earlier about how the way the groupings of the regions works against it in some cases. So because this is strictly formatted and you only get a single mechanical choice, like a single archetype per section. So the Broken Lands, where you get the Aldori Duelist, is also where Numeria is. And we don't get lasers. We don't get anything. If you have any interest in Numeria after reading this, it's like, well, I hope someday they put out a Numeria book because there's zero Numeria mechanics here. And that's the same for every region. Like every region has a whole bunch of varied flavors of varied things that might be of interest to you. Everything's got a mechanical hook. Everything's got, like, with good reason, because you do actually want to be able to play in these areas and you want to say, my character is from this, and know which direction to go with your build. And so it's this combination of, like, if they do ever do a Broken Land specific book, will that book feel incomplete because the Eldori Duelist won't be in there since it's already been made? This book feels a little incomplete because they decided to do one hyper focused mechanical option and leave all the other ones just for the future.
And they're not all hyper focused. Sometimes the archetype is regional, and sometimes it is like this one specific area. And then sometimes it's even super specific, like the Red Mantis Assassin. You have to be a Red Mantis Assassin to get that. Like, that has to be your background. Also, you have to be lawful evil.
But you don't have to have killed somebody just to join the Assassins. Yeah, although I guess if you already have to be an assassin, no, you probably have to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're going to have to eventually, because that's not something you can just, like, take the at-home commuter course for.
Perram, I want to go to one page to show off the art, and then we can take some listener questions.
All right.
Go to page 130 for me, please.
And while we do this, listeners, get some questions in. Okay, I'm pulling it up on screen. What do you want to show off on this page?
Page 130? They're adorable.
Yes, they are super adorable.
I want to know all about them. Like this owl-themed, maybe druid, looks like a gnome to me, and her Leshy companion, her Leshy party member. Like,
it's probably
what's their
the
relationship?
Leshy familiar option that druids can take.
It might be.
Or it might be a Leshy.
The Leshy is going to be a playable ancestry in a couple of books, so it might just be previewing that these two are adventuring partners of equal sway, not just a class feature, Perram.
But not height.
No, definitely not. I mean, if that's a gnome, then that Leshy is, like, not even a foot tall.
It has to be a gnome. It definitely looks gnome.
So there's a lot of really good art in here, but this one stood out, especially because there's nothing. It's not previewing, like, a piece of mechanics to tie into it like the archetypes do. It's just an adorable piece of art. Okay, so we do have a couple of listener questions. I know that we got a question from from our Discord channel, because we specifically called out if anyone had anything they'd like us to cover. And Luis, who works for the network, and we should have said full disclosure at the beginning, developed this book. So there is some kind of a bias between the No Direction Network and the development of this book, but I believe Perram and I would have been happy with this book, even if Luis, but somebody of equal Luis talent, had. He wants to know the thoughts and usefulness of the glossary and index.
It's I've been liking these gloss dexes in the previous books, and including this book. It saves time just going to one place and getting both of those pieces of answer. And it's kind of, in this book specifically, more important because things aren't arranged alphabetically. If you want to know where a country is, or about a specific country that you know about or have read about, you can't just go through the book normally, because you have to figure out which region it's in. And while there's several places to look that stuff up, the Glossdex is the fastest way to find out, well, where is Aldori? Where is Gex? Where is... Gex isn't any of this. Gex is a bad PS1 game.
Something that I found interesting, the gods are listed in here. But you mentioned earlier there's no real religion in here. Well, that's because, let's say I'm looking up Rovagug. Let's say Rovagug gets mentioned in one of the chapters. All right, what's Rovagug's deal? Go to the glossary. Chaotic evil god of destruction, disaster, and wrath, known as the rough beast. Check core rulebook, page 439. So stuff that is, like, really fundamental to the campaign setting that's not referenced in here, but is referenced in the core rulebook. You're redirected there. I think that is not an obvious choice, and I think that does make this index stronger.
And I agree. And I do want to call out that the gods are part of that 2-page spread thing. And you're going to often see, like, some of the gods there that you might not know anything about, like Razmir. He's not in the core rulebook.
Next. Oh, actually, there's a background that gives you Razmiran lore. And for people that don't know, Razmir is the living god, but he's basically just a big con artist who is pretending to be a god, and he has tricked all these cultists into following him. And so when you have Razmir lore, I wonder if you are really into the lie or you actually know the truth.
I really hope it's the former. Like, a true believer of Razmir is got to be a fun thing.
All right, Kitsune Warlock asked what our favorite new location is, as in location as in the paragraphs with headers, i.e. city academies. New as in I didn't know it existed.
Well, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to say the Tyrant's Grasp, which is an area in the Absalom area where certain things that might spoil certain adventure paths go down. But it was like, I'm very familiar with Absalom, and I'm very familiar with Absalom's map. So imagine my surprise when I'm flipping through here. Oh, goody, goody, goody. There's Absalom. I've adventured here a ton of times. And what is that giant crater doing next to the city? That seems important.
Khan265 wants to know what our favorite archetypes are. I can go first on this one because I would say it's the Pathfinder agent. It's versatile. It actually does. So the Pathfinder agent dedication lets you add your level to untrained skills, which is funny because that was taken out of the core rulebook from the playtest because it was just viewed as too strong and it just makes it feel like you're not bad at anything. And I'm okay with that as a flavorful choice for Pathfinder agents aren't bad at anything, or at least like the stuff they're bad at, they at least can keep up with. They're just that kind of multi-talented.
Yeah, because they get that book learning.
That they do. Yeah, they also get the Wayfinder, the unlock. What's that called?
Oh, the Archaic Wayfinder?
No, but when you unlock an uncommon
rarity
option.
Access. They get access to Wayfinders.
There you go. Yes. They get access to Wayfinders, which is a great way of handling the idea that Pathfinders are known for their Wayfinders.
Mm-hmm. And that's a super useful thing to have because in this book there's like Archaic Wayfinders, which are Wayfinders that you can learn a cantrip by owning, which is cool. And Wayfinders themselves are very helpful because it allows you to have an Ion Stone without advertising, I have an Ion Stone. Because otherwise you've got a big rock floating around your head all the time.
Yes. Although you just reminded me of another archetype I was a big fan of, and I'm just trying to find it. I believe it was the one associated with Mwangi. Let me see. Do you remember your favorite archetype while I'm scrolling?
We already talked about it. Aldori Sword Lord. It was so on top. It was so on point and cool with what it could do that it made me want to play martial characters. And I don't usually like to play martial characters. But I like playing Pathfinder 2 martial characters because I get to cast sword.
Not in just I'd be careful with that wording because that is what 4th edition was criticized for, 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly the same. There we go. The Magic Warrior. Is this the guy I was thinking of? If not, I'm just going to drop this.
Oh, this is Archmage Matumbi's people, right? Yeah,
and it's one part warriors. Vigilante because you get a mask with it. It hides your identity, and you can unlock the powers of the animal of your mask. So I'm, in the middle of coming up with another version of Mono Hombre, the monkey luchador that I have very rarely played, but I'm super attached to lately. And he would actually fit very well into the Magic Warrior archetype. And he would be like a monk Magic Warrior, which is not, I think, the usual direction that you would go for this archetype. Mm-mm. So I think I've narrowed it down to my 3 favorite archetypes in this book. Perram, I think it's safe to say this is a solid book.
It really is. I already this was kind of like, I wasn't super enthusiastic about this book coming out because I have so many of the previous versions of this type of book, and I knew it was going to be kind of light on character options compared to like what we are going to get next time with the with the Lost Omens character guide and then Lost Omens God and Magic. We know that those are going to be much, much, much more beefy in the player options than this one. But man, I was just really happy. It's such a great way to become reacquainted with these areas. This would be my recommended way to learn about Galarian for the first time. This is a great way to learn the game world if you don't know it, or if you just need a reminder course for it. And the character options that do exist are just really solid.
Yeah, I was surprised with just how excited some of these archetypes made me. Uh, at one point, we were talking about this book in preview, and you said that you were as excited for this as you were for the Advanced Player's Guide of First Edition, because this would be where you really can see what the Second Edition rules can do. And I disagreed. I said, no, this is going to be a campaign setting book. Let's really wait for whatever the equivalent of the Advanced Player's Guide turns out to be, which it does turn out to be. Second Edition Advanced Player's Guide. I was wrong. I was wrong to disagree, Perram. This has opened my eyes to a lot more potential for Second Edition rules and the direction that things can go.
Right. And it's a good direction. All right. So that wraps it up. I guess we're recommending this book. Who should buy this book?
I think anyone should buy this book if you're invested in Pathfinder. It's gorgeous. It's well laid out. It's fun to read. It gets you into the world in from multiple directions. Like I said, those 2-page spreads are worth the price of the book alone. Like you're going to be running Pathfinder Society, it's like, oh, I'm in this new area. What do I know about it? You just go to that 2-page spread. You don't even have to reread the chapter. It tells you everything you need to know as a summary of what you should expect and play up when you're running that adventure.
Yeah. I would say I guess you're right. I was going to really recommend this for people who want to know more about the campaign setting specifically, because it's such a great way to learn it. But even if you are familiar with the campaign setting, this is a great way to reinforce it, to become reacquainted for it. And you're going to kind of want to know what's in here anyway because of the updates where it brings things in. It's what are the Gravelands? What happened to Last Wall? Well, this will tell you.
And also, the faster you acquaint yourself with these region names and more or less what's in them, I think the better you'll understand any campaign set material that comes out in the future. So the adventure paths and adventures and whatnot, because I have a feeling these are going to become the new default names, and some of them are more obvious than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm already seeing a series of 10 books would be a real easy set of books to write.
I would be excited about that. That would be great, because a book like this is similar to the hardcovers that came out for the campaign setting line. But of the books that have been announced, none of them really feel like this was the niche that the Player's Companion and the softcover campaign setting books filled. Feels like this is the hardcovers of the campaign setting. So the class guide and Gods and Magic. Those books you just described of one per region, that's starting to feel like the niche that was filled by the soft covers. And that's what I really liked the soft covers for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the one thing I am worried about is that because we're going to the slower format of release, it might be a lot longer till we get to those books than it was in first edition. But those books still exist. So if there's any of these regions that interest you, I would recommend, if possible, if you're going to go back and buy some soft covers of regions that interest you to learn more about, I would recommend going for the 64-page campaign setting versions of those books, because those are more fluff heavy than crunch heavy. So there's going to be less material that you have to ignore in the second edition game. And also, they tend to be the more up-to-date versions of those books, because they put out those soft covers in the early part of the game, and then all of those soft covers, I think all of them, ended up getting 64-page soft covers later in the game's lifespan that was a little bit more up to date. So there's going to be less that you're not familiar with.
Perram, you talk about the slowed down release schedule, but we've already got the class guide coming out next month. Mm-hmm. We're going to be reviewing it in a couple of weeks. We're reviewing it probably before we get the playtest document for the Advanced Player's Guide.
Yeah.
So there's going to actually be quite a few of these hardcovers out before we get the next significant splat book, player-focused option for second edition.
Well, isn't the character guide a player-focused book?
All right. Well, so this is something that's going to bug me forever. The fact that they took campaign setting off of the Lost Omen books covers and that the lines are now a single line, except you've got clearly the crunchy ones that have a little bit of campaign setting in them, and then the campaign setting ones that still are crunch focused, but it's like world flavored crunch versus the non-world flavored crunch, except for a little bit. It's beyond just my exception of wanting like a completely generic one. I at least want, there is a clear distinction between these two lines. There is what used to be the rulebook line and the role-playing game line and the campaign setting line. These lines still exist in everything but name alone, which makes our job of reviewing them really annoying.
But also more important. No, we're at least doing a big service to our listeners by telling them what this book is for.
Yes, well, especially because the titles on these books are not doing them any favors. So next book we're going to review is going to be the class options book that's actually just races and factions, or sorry, ancestries and factions.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
At least gods and magic. Well, gods and magic is probably going to be mostly gods and a little bit of magic.
I don't know. I just don't know anymore.
I know.
They have surprised us a lot. Usually I'm happy with the surprises, though.
You know, they say not to judge a book by its cover, but the cover does more for telling me what's in this book than the title.
Blithering Wither asked how this compared to the first edition. Earlier in the episode, we go over that really good. I think that this is a better, if you haven't, I think this is probably the best it's been about learning the campaign setting, and definitely the most fun to read of any of those previous books. But it doesn't go into quite as much depth as the two hardcovers, the previous hardcovers did, that were twice the page length. I still would recommend, if I was picking up one today, of all the options out there, of all 5 versions of this book that have existed, this is the one I'd say to pick up if you're just buying one.
And Zathos of Pharistia wants to know the Magic Warrior background. Does it seem like a good, viable choice? I don't know if this was asked before or after I talked about how it was one of my other favorite archetypes. And it's not a background, it's an archetype. Yes, I think so. I know that archetypes, the way that they work now is that it's kind of plugging into another class. So I'm sure there will be some classes that it plugs into more effectively than others. It does give you a little bit of magic, but the magic is mostly like martial focused, or at least utilitarian. So I do think it's going to lean more towards the martial classes and the rogue than it would to a full-on caster. Even though it's the Magic Warrior, it's really the emphasis is on the warrior, and the magic is the tool that the warrior uses.
This is Pathfinder. All warriors use magic. You hit them with it.
Perram, one final thought.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go to page 5?
Page 5.
Preview that.
Okay, hold on. Scrolling. What am I going to?
Piece of art.
Piece of art. Oh, the 2-page. Oh, I know what you're going for.
Yes. Cameo appearance by Damiel, the retired alchemist who was replaced by Fumbus. This may be a depiction of his final battle. We don't know exactly what happened to him, other than that by the time 2nd edition came out, the iconic alchemist was a goblin now.
Not the only cameo appearance. Shardra makes an appearance in this book too.
That's true. Shardra, the Pathfinder agent. Correct?
No, Shardra, the iconic shaman, who is in the Shining Kingdom section on page 126. There she is with her little rock familiar animal, lizard thing.
Rock familiar animal. Oh yeah, that's totally her.
Yeah.
She's not even like in an action scene like Damiel was. She's just flat out there.
Yeah.
But the Pathfinder agent is also a character that if you've played Pathfinder Society seasons, I want to say 6 on, you've probably encountered this character. She was the helper Pathfinder agent in the first Evergreen after the first steps. I'm forgetting her name right now, but she is a recurring character in Pathfinder Society, so it's cool that she's the iconic Pathfinder agent.
And you will meet her again in Pathfinder Society 1-01 for 2nd edition. All right, I think we've covered this. I think we've said all we can say about this book.
Absolutely. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. We'll be right back with the news.
Banter.
Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news. Pathfinder news.
And we're back.
Welcome to the second segment of this episode. This is a banter segment where we're just going to talk about a couple of things that are on our minds as Pathfinder enthusiasts. Perram, you've had one that you want to talk about for a couple episodes now. But last episode, you had the plague.
There's news. There's real news.
Oh, sorry. All right. In Pathfinder news segment, we talk about the latest happenings in Pathfinder from Paizo or third-party publishers. Basically, anything of relevance to you as Pathfinder enthusiast.
I love that you had to do that.
You're welcome.
All right.
I was holding up my Pathfinder glass, waiting to take that sip of water, too.
Okay. The other news is, it's just a couple of minor pieces. First is, we kind of touched on it earlier, but if you do want one of these books and you see it, it looks like it's on back order. And I do know that my local store has sold out. I do know that Amazon is having a hard time fulfilling orders there. So, yay. Sellout? Question mark?
Well, we also know that this book was supposed to come out at Gen Con, and then it got delayed for, I believe it was printer reasons. It was like a file didn't quite get to the printer at the right time was the story I heard. And so it's a book that we are kind of lucky to have in our hands at this point. Although you have it in your hands, I have it on my screen. I am going to actually have to try and track it down at some of my local gaming stores because I would like a hardcover. And I might as well get a first edition because it's not like the second edition is going to have errata in it.
Yeah, not this immediate, no. And it's just, hey, yeah, the game seems to be doing well. If books are hard to get, that means people are buying them. And I'm glad to hear the game is doing well. That's just a minor little point. But the other bit of news I wanted to call out is the Pathfinder paint sets got released.
Oh, yes. I don't know how new this news is. It's new to us.
Evidently they kind of offhand mentioned it at PaizoCon during one of the panels. But it just sort of appeared on Reaper's page all of a sudden, and it's two different 28 paint sets. So 56 paints if you get both sets. They're $100 a piece. That is a fairly good price for that many paints. And all the paints are evidently new colors, but they've all got names of Pathfinder things attached to them and pictures of Pathfinder's miniatures on the front cover. And other than that, they seem to just be standard Master Series paints. If you get both sets, you've got a darn good paint collection. Reaper's my favorite paint brand by far. I've tried all the other competitors that are pretty standard, GW, Vallejo, Army Painter. And Reaper just again and again and again is my go-to paint selection. And so I like that this exists. I may or may not buy it, depending on if I need another new paint set. And depending
I forget, I at one point was gifted a set of, or actually the two sets of Reaper paints that were not Pathfinder specific. They were just in a similar case to this. They're my primary paints right now in my collection since my Games Workshop ones went dry. And I do also endorse them. Other than every now and then you will get a color that runs a little watery. But every year at the paint and tank, I get to use a variety of their Reaper paints. I get to use them at home, and they're great, high quality paints.
Yeah, if they run watery, it just means you've got to shake them a lot more. They do separate a little bit more drastically than other brands. And by a lot more, I mean a lot more, like an unhealthy amount of shaking. I'm strongly considering getting one of those little electric paint shakers for my Reaper paints.
Oh, wow.
They're actually just rebranded nail polish shakers that for the same reason. But if you do get Reaper paints, go to your local store, get a small package of BBs, put a couple of BBs in each paint bottle. That'll save your wrist a lot of work when you're shaking them. And I'm thinking about getting the paint shaker too. It's like a $30 toy. And I've just been lazy, which is the only reason I haven't gotten it. But that is the paint separation issue. Was I gifted one? They offered it and I declined because I already had it. I already had those. They're great.
Now, Perram, I'm looking at the covers of the two different sets. Paint set number 1, the 3 colors in the front are they're primary, they're big bold colors. And then paint set number 2, the 3 colors in the front are I don't know art terminology, unfortunately. They're fancier. They're a little more shaded. Is that the difference between paint set 1 and 2, or is it really just
Paint
we
set
drew a
1
line?
seems to mostly be primaries, colors, like, and paint set 2 seems to be a lot of your more specialty colors and metallics. I would consider neither of those to be a complete paint set. Me personally, with how I paint, you would probably want to get both. But if you were only going to get one, the paint set number 1 would be the one to get.
Zathos the First Year wants to know if they are latex paints.
They are
water-soluble latex
acrylics.
paints.
Yes, they're latex-based acrylic paints.
Airbrush friendly.
Yep, but Olive Reaper's paints are airbrush friendly.
Fast drying, matte finish, easy to clean.
These are all true statements. Also true.
These are all statements on the box.
These are also all true of Olive Reaper's paints. The only thing special about these paints is they got a Pathfinder sticker on them. Okay. And it's a good selection of paints. This is usually cheaper than the full set would go for of their other sets, and it's a well curated set. So it's a good set if you're getting serious in the painting and you're like, I want a lot of paint. And the basic getting started sets, I want more. And this will get you well established in a lot of colors.
So one of the reasons that Games Workshop was my go-to paint before I got the Reaper sets and my Games Workshop sets dried up is because when I was a White Dwarf magazine subscriber, they would use their paints. And so in all of the painting guides, all the examples, it would be like, mix these two paints using these names. Don't just like match the colors. These are the ones you need to get. And that's really helpful for me because, as I mentioned, I don't know paint terminology. I'm not great with visual arts. And so if Reaper or Paizo would put out a blog of just like, hey, if you want to paint Seone to look like, published art Seone, here's the guide. Here are the Pathfinder licensed paints that you should use to get that same effect, then I will definitely use these, even if there's a lot of them that are similar to the paints I already have, because I absolutely need those guides, like right down to the names of the paints I should be using.
Okay. I think that would make really fun content. I know that Reaper has started to do Twitch streaming of like actual live paints of their minis. And that has been really cool because Sandra Garrity was on one of those and she's one of my favorites.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And that's just been great to watch. I like watching people paint miniatures and learning from them. And I know maybe I'm in the minority there, but that would be great content for them to do. This is definitely not how I do it, though, because I was like, oh, Warhammer Mini, I don't care what you say I should paint it. I'm going to get this weird blue because I like it. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of silver so it gets shiny. And I mix all my paints, and at least I keep a paint mix chart of my own, so when I want to reproduce for my minis, I can do that. But that's
good because my Sisters of Battle was a unique green, and when I ran out of it, I could not have any more Sisters of Battle.
Can't it just be a second chapter that uses different heraldry?
My Space Marines was already 2 chapters. It was the Crimson Fist, which by their lore had mostly been wiped out. And so the Iron Hands sent a relief chunk of their chapter to the Crimson Fists. And then my Crimson Fist chaplain used the robotic hand that came into it. And I posed it so that he was looking at it because the story in my head was that the Iron Hands actually showed up to absorb the Crimson Fist and to be like, you guys are injured. You can't afford more casualties. Take these cybernetics that we just happen to be really in love with. And it was all just in a coup for one chapter to absorb the other. And my captain symbolized that because I was much more into the story of Warhammer than I was tactics and able to efficiently make an army. So I already had one army that was made up of 2 distinct color schemes. So I couldn't do that with my sisters as well.
Yeah. We have a question from chat from Con265. Inks and washes in these sets? No, these are all just base paints.
Any paint is a wash if you water it down enough.
Yeah. And ink if you water it down a little.
Really? I thought ink was thicker than paint and just completely different.
Oh, here and there. You can get there's some inks that are basically like glaze medium plus tone. and there's fun ways to mix it. But you can get the approximation of what an ink behaves like by making a wash and stopping halfway.
Now, Perram, I mentioned earlier that there was a conversation topic that you wanted to talk about for a couple of episodes.
Oh yes,
It's actually kind of related to this. It's miniatures.
yes. I have a lot of miniatures, and this isn't just a flex moment for me. Because the reason that I have a lot of miniatures is I was very fortunate to start collecting miniatures and stuff at a certain time period, back when the Dungeons and Dragons miniature game was being produced, and it was being produced by Wizards of the Coast at the time. HeroClix was big at the time. These collectible miniature games were a thing. And so you could get a very large collection of miniatures fairly cheaply, if we consider them today. Like $10 could get you this little cardboard sleeve with 8 miniatures in it that were all pre-painted and also happened to come with stat cards for a really fun game that was fun to play. And you didn't know what you were going to get, but you were guaranteed to get some stuff. It's kind of like the random pack miniatures still exist. WizKids still makes them, but they're much more expensive and you get much less minis per box. But back then it was super cheap, and I bought them by the caseload. And when you buy them by the caseload, it's even cheaper. So I bought cases and cases and cases of this stuff, and I have this massive miniature collection, and all the GMs of my generation and older usually have one of these collections, or at least the vast majority of us that I play with. If you've been around of a certain age, this was just too good of a deal to pass up. And that died when 4th edition came out. There was a lot of market factors at play here. This 4th edition isn't to blame for this one entirely.
No, but that is kind of the story of 4th edition.
Kind of. It might be. There's. I'm not getting into that. But they no longer exist. You can't get... The WizKids make some really good random mini packs. It's almost like that day, but it's like 4 times the cost compared to what it is. Even not even just talking about inflation, just like it's like $500 to get a case of that stuff, and I was getting $80 cases of D&D and getting more minis in those cases, getting twice as many minis for a fifth the cost. And that's not to say that the WizKids mini packs are a bad deal. It's still $3-ish a mini, and that's still pretty good for a pre-painted mini. But it means that people of my generation are kind of privileged that we have these mass collections. And I'm thinking, and I'm having players and new GMs. One of them, and the reason this came up is I've been trying to tell people, like, well, how do you get started? And I've been just rattling off, well, you can get pawn sets. That's a real easy way to get a bunch of miniatures to play the game with. And then one of them told me, it's like, no offense, man, but I kind of get jealous every time we play with you because you just reach into your boxes and you always have the exact miniature of the monster we're fighting. And I want that. And how do I do that? And then and I'm like, I don't know how you do that anymore. So how does a GM get an impressive miniature collection today?
My first guess is eBay.
Oh, sure. eBay. I thought about that. The cost of these minis on eBay are astronomical.
Even the commons?
Even the commons, depending on the common, they can go more than rares. Like if you want Lizard Man, it gets expensive. If you want like the particular assassin common, that it's expensive. Like you're talking at least $4 or $5 a mini now, when they used to be $1. And you're talking about some of the rares, like you want a Bahir, cough up $80 for a miniature we just used to joke about because we got disappointed when we pulled the Bahir and didn't get one of the big dragons.
What was wrong with the Bahir?
I know nothing. I love my Bahir. He's one of my favorite minis, but like people were wanting to pull Tiamat out of that set. Speaking of which, Tiamat, $125.
I don't have Tiamat, but I have a Bahir. And I don't think I like them more than $80 worth of holding on to them.
So it's like that. It's like all these cool minis. If you were trying to build them out of the old minis, it's going to cost you a fortune. And buying the WizKids minis is expensive. So then what do? Well, bones are cheap and deep cuts are cheap, but you have to paint them. So you've got to learn to paint. And as easy as cool as it is to paint minis, I love painting minis. It's a great hobby. I have more than 5,000 D&D minis pre-painted.
Right, but we're not solving your problem. We're solving the new GM's problem.
Yeah, right. They said, how do a GM get a collection like this? I could not paint 5,000 minis.
Oh, yes. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So I haven't finished painting my first Bones box.
But unlike the randomized stuff, with Bones, you could get an adventure path specific miniatures, and you won't need the 5,000, and therefore you won't need to paint 5,000 of them. But how many monsters honestly, are there in a single adventure?
The reason that I have just about every monster is because I didn't pick them. Like, I didn't know I was going to need Quaggoths as often as I need a Quaggoth, but because I bought them by the caseload, I've got like 3 Quaggoths here. So when it's time to pull one out, I grab it and I have it. And that's not something I would have stocked. The randomization element meant that less common, more weird miniatures got a chance to shine and make it into collections that wouldn't have happened if we were picking and choosing individually. Like, what happens if you're going to go into let's say today, it's time to go, and you haven't been like collecting these things like this. You're starting from scratch, but you've got a pretty decent little base collection. You've got your orcs and your dragons and your common bestiary items, and then you flip through the rule book, and it's like weird random let's say roper. Do you have a roper?
I do not have a roper.
Do you want
to my knowledge?
Well, even if you buy the bones, you've got to find the bones, mail order the bones likely, because unless you've got a really great local gaming store that has stocked all the bones, and you can get one, and then you get a roper a week later, or 5 days. Maybe you're lucky and it's on Amazon Prime. You get it 3 days later. Then you've got to paint your roper, which I don't have to worry about because I was suckered into collecting a bunch of minis I didn't want.
So, like, I don't know how you're going to react to this, but I will often substitute a miniature that I know I have to save myself the 5 seconds of finding it. And I will just use the completely wrong miniature. So, like, the idea that, like, even if I had one of every monster, I am just disorganized in that way that I would not be able to use them to the fullest effect. I would be wasted as someone who actually has all of those monsters.
Right.
I would be happy to use the pawns.
Right. And I get that.
Easier to organize.
For other players, and for a lot of players, that's acceptable. That's an answer. But I'm trying to answer the question, like, what do you do if you want to have a collection like this? What do I tell these newbies when they ask me how I got this and how they can get another one? And it's like this time period in history has passed. And it's like pawns is a great answer. You will always have pawns. 3D printers are making it easier. You can get a $200 resin printer now that'll print any given D&D-ish mini or Pathfinder-ish mini if you can find an STL for it, either buying it or in the free sites. The legal free sites, don't pirate your minis, people. There's lots of legally free minis out there, and then there's really cool minis you pay for, and they're cheap. So pay for your files, people. It doesn't cost much. And then you can print those off, and they're really great. But you're left painting. Like, we don't have a solution of pre-painted minis. Learn to paint. Buy the Pathfinder paint set. Learn to speed paint. Learning to speed... I have become much happier with miniature painting when I adopted the theory that no mini shall take more than 15 minutes.
Oh, wow. I don't remember the last time I spent only 15 minutes on a mini. That feels like a coat.
I mean, yeah, but when you get, like, you learn to just live with little bitty sloppy mistakes, and then you mask them and then move on. Because having a dozen painted skeletons that are all right is still better than fielding 9 unpainted skeletons and the one really awesome one.
Okay, so here's my proposal. You get pawns.
Yes.
Every time you use a pawn, you make a note of, this is a monster I have used, and then you make an effort to get that monster. So you can get it secondhand on eBay, you can get the miniature and paint it. It's not something that you need in the future. It's just something you know you have needed. And as your collection grows, you will be able to swap out the miniatures that you can use miniatures instead of pawns. And it's just based on these are the things that you have encountered. And eventually your collection will grow to the most common monsters at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is just buy a crap ton of the new WizKids line, which they're great. They're great minis. I still buy packs anytime I see them in the store. But man, that gets costly. That's a small fortune.
It's funny. So I haven't bought a case of those in a while, but if I'm in a game store with no shopping agenda, I will tend to leave with terrain from those sets. And I'm not sure what it is. Just those are the things that are speaking to me more than, oh, hey, John Bastille says Dungeon Craft on the YouTube channel, episode 43, talks about some options.
Yep.
How about you? Oh, do you know that episode?
I know that episode. It's a pretty good episode. I disagree with him on certain points. He's making compromises I wouldn't.
Okay. Well, can you summarize some of those compromises he made and some of the other points he makes?
Well, he talks about like buying war minis. He talks about paper minis, which is a great. I love paper minis. Printing your own paper minis are great. And then like it. Watch the episode, but I would want cool, accurate minis. So for me, if I was doing this today, like if I did not, if my my building burned up and I had to replace my collection tomorrow.
That did not sound like wood you just knocked on.
This is wood.
Yeah, all right.
It
just sounded very teeny.
My microphone is not marked to that wood, so you're hearing the springs of the microphone.
Yes, that makes sense.
But I would probably go really heavy into bones and just paint a lot of bones. That would be how I would replace them. And use pawns until I built that collection up, like you said. Buying a pawn box is like the easiest thing you should always do as a GM if you're getting started, because it's like, here's $50 and I've got all the minis I'm going to need for a while.
And the ones that don't tend to be counted are the gargantuan ones. So put a little more money into a couple of gargantuans, because you are saving money on the miniature side by getting pawns.
Yeah.
And so if you focus mainly on, and the odds are if you have a gargantuan creature in an encounter, then it's a significant creature, and busting out a miniature for those rare occasions will totally be worth it.
Oh yeah. I spent $50 once on I say that, and they're stupid expensive anymore. But I went to Gen Con shopping for a $50 mini specifically for a big boss fight for my players.
That blue dragon.
That blue dragon. Yeah. That
I was there when you bought it.
Yeah. It was great for the 2 combat rounds it lived. I think I've told this story before, but one of my players in a very early, like it's like issue 2 of Rise of the Rune Lords, they give you a couple of Dragon Slayer arrows. Because there's going to be some little baby dragons you're going to fight soon, and they come in handy for that fight. They didn't use them. They hang on to them until the book 6 super awesome boss battle dragon shows up, and then he died very quickly. And that big old mini appeared on the field for like 5 minutes. But you know what? My players still tell that story, and they haven't told stories of other monsters they've killed. So $50 well spent.
There you go. Bastille is talking about using foam shapes, cubes that he got from his local craft shop. Something I've also seen becoming more popular is using Lego. And Lego could be whatever monster you want it to be.
At PaizoCon, I saw a particular genius of a GM just use the bases. Like he had a bunch of the pawn bases of different colors, and he would just throw out like a red large. That's the dragon.
Makes sense to me.
There's the lava swarm. This big round blue one, that's the storm giant.
Yeah, especially when you count the colors you can get for the Starfinder pawns, you can get a large variety of colors. It easily becomes something that you then just code. And if you show off some art on top of it, then you're given a little more context to the color, and players can fill in the blanks.
And in my GM kit that I carry with me everywhere, I carry a chess set, because the different chess pawns and rooks and different colors of white and black help me designate which faction they're part of, and I find that's better than substituting a wrong miniature, especially if it's drastically wrong, because it's easier for somebody to look at a pawn and me tell them all the black pawns are orc soldiers than it is for them to remember that this Sahagwan is an orc soldier.
How would you feel about meeples?
I think meeples are a great option. And I saw a really cool product, which was called the Meeple Dungeon.
This is probably a product I was just coming up with in my own head, not something I've seen before.
Yeah, so it's this little bitty tin case that has like a bunch of meeples in the shape of common adventurers and bad in one color, and then common monsters in red. And they have like big ones that are like dragons and giants and stuff, but they're just silhouettes, meeple silhouettes, no paint on them, whatever. And it also had like little tiny like dungeon tiles, like all collapsed into this little tin. It was basically a dungeon in a box. It was really impressive. I was super impressed when I saw it. That'd be a great option for a minimalist setup or a travel setup.
I am looking at what I believe what you're just describing, and yeah, this is a cool set. It's square tiles of like 3x3, and then some are 1x3, so that you've got some corridors and you've got rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's little door meeples, little chest meeples, stair meeples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's it called?
So, yeah.
What's the name of it?
You had it, Meeple Dungeon.
Yeah, see, that's super cool. It's a great option. I would recommend that for a minimalist setup or a new game master for sure.
In chat, Kitsune Warlock is talking about all the different options for using starbursts as miniatures and eating them as you kill them.
Yeah, that's a great tip. He also says, pro tip, make the yellow starburst the casters. No one wants the yellow ones. Yellow's my favorite.
Yellow's your favorite?
Yes. I like yellow and orange.
I think I like all the colors, including the yellow one. So it's funny. The picture that I was just talking about, I saw on a Facebook page that seemed to be reviewing it, but I can't actually find a product page where I could purchase this Meeple Dungeon.
Dungeon
Meeple,
I think it might be STL files. Like,
really?
Print your own. It looked like to me when I looked at the product, it looked like something that came out of a 3D printer.
Are you ready to move on? Because I could say, speaking of 3D printers, right now.
You got one?
Ready.
You got one? You got 3D printer?
I do not, but a coworker does.
Oh.
And so, as people who follow the Artful Fridays blog posts or Facebook shares know, I went to Hero Forge and I bought my first Hero Forge STL file instead of having them print my miniature. So Mono Hombre is my monkey-themed luchador that I was talking about earlier and talk about often. And so I made him on Hero Forge. And so Hero Forge, we talked briefly about this when they introduced this. They've got the new posing option.
Yeah, that's super awesome.
Oh, is it ever? So this is a very simple character in that he's wearing very little. And he doesn't even have facial features. He is supposed to look like he's wearing a full mask. So normally I would not make a Hero Forge of this miniature because, Hero Forge is all about customizability and finding the exact miniature you want. And I could turn most monk miniatures from WizKids or Reaper or whoever into a Mono Hombre miniature. But once I got to posing and I was able to recreate Lars' art pretty much exactly, I wish I had tilted his head up a little bit more, but that turned this in from like, oh, he's not a character that's worth having as a Hero Forge miniature into something that I impulse bought, and I rarely impulse buy anything. And so my coworker was telling me that, actually, I've got the quote up here. He's got an SLA 3D printer, a SparkMaker FHD. Does that mean anything to you, Perram?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. SLA.
Still nope.
So that means that it's not resin.
I would agree with that. Not sure what it is. Oh wait, I think he talks about that. Using a 405 NM wavelength resin. Oh, so it is resin.
Okay, cool. Resin printer. Those will make really detailed minis. If you're going to print minis, a resin printer is the way to go. And resin printer prices, like the tiny ones, are down to like $200 now, but you only need a tiny one. Even really big minis can print on tiny printers.
Now, what about the material? How much does it cost to stock your printer?
More.
Yes.
It's like you can print if you're using PLA to print a mini, and you can get like a micro nozzle for a PLA printer. That's the one that just extrudes the plastic in layers. If you get a really tiny nozzle for it and you calibrate it really well, you can get almost resin quality. I've seen some really impressive stuff with that if you put forth the work. And like the little nozzle head is like $10, so it's not even expensive mod to get for your printer. You can do that, and those cost like 14 cents a mini, less, honestly, probably. Like a dungeon tile, like a full dungeon tile is like 14 cents, so a mini is smaller than that. Whereas if you're printing in resin, it's usually like $1 for the mini.
So you were talking about the details, and I will try and show this off. But so Monohombre has a mask. It's not just an undetailed face. You can't see it in the picture, unfortunately, but you can see the slight impression of eyes and a mouth, and it's actually extremely detailed for you to be able to see that minor detail. Like it's not just like, oh yeah, it kind of left the impression. No, it looks exactly like the STL file that I downloaded.
Yeah, resins do. Resins, that's the power of resin printing.
And then something we were talking about in chat when I brought up that I had bought the STL one was talking about how something you can do with this is, so this is Monohombre is a single character, but if I do something like in the first campaign that I did with my main Pathfinder and D&D group, the one that I met Tina in, I had a group called the Six Fingered Gauntlet. They were a cult, and they fought the Six Fingered Gauntlet mooks over and over again. So if I ever have something where I've got a very distinct mook, a reoccurring mook, I would definitely print off a vast number of them using the STL file. And Louis was saying he could have printed 3 in the same amount of time it took him to print 1. So he could have easily just popped out, 3 and then 6 and then 9. And suddenly I've got a full encounter of these guys customized to my group. And it just suddenly becomes a common miniature, even though it's a unique miniature, which is the perfect implementation of the Hero Forge STL file.
Yep. So how resin, for those of you and why you're able to do that, resin printers can basically print the whole bed worth at the same speed as just a piece of thing on the bed, because the material itself hardens when exposed to UV light. So there's a little bed, basically an LCD screen at the bottom of it that just shoots UV layers, so that it pushes the platform down into the liquid against the screen, and then it flashes what that single layer looks like, a silhouette of it, which hardens just a tiny little fraction of that, and then it pulls up that tiny little fraction and then flashes the next layer again and again. So as long as it is that bed full, it will all print at the same speed.
Which is how I could have gotten 3 Monohombres, which would have been good because I could have had, just alternate masks on them. And if I screwed up a painting on one, I could have had a backup one.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking 14 cents to $1 for a miniature, then that's like Louis did it for free, but apparently I don't have to feel guilty about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's still much cheaper than, buying a 3D printed one online, or, I guess it's about comparable to a Bones of Monohombre at $1.
Yeah, but Bones isn't making my monkey luchador pair.
No, they don't.
You know who is making my monkey luchador? Me.
Yeah.
I am about to join into a regular Emerald Spire game.
Oh,
we at one point played the Emerald Spire first level,
mm-hmm.
in which I played Singe, the fire monkey.
Right.
And so now I've got Monohombre, the monkey luchador. So coincidentally, twice into the Emerald Spire, I will be playing a monkey-themed character. I don't do this on purpose. I Mono Hombre, people will remember, was a character I made for Luis's wrestling game that we played at PaizoCon, and I liked him so much that I brought him into the not Hell's Rebels and not Rise of the Rune Lords. What's Curse of the Crimson Throne? The Curse of the Crimson Throne game I was playing, and that game died after I'd only played Mono Hombre a couple of times. So now Emerald Spire, I believe, will be where Mono Hombre gets to shine.
Now, this is going to be a first edition Emerald Spire?
This will be a first edition game. In fact, one thing I was going to talk about is how hard it is to find second edition games.
Really?
So, yeah. So, like, I am not actively seeking first or second edition games or any additional games, honestly. And yet I have been contacted several times recently about playing in a first edition game. So my old D&D and Pathfinder group that I was talking about, the one that they still play with Jeff Chapman, the guy who is the reason that we replaced the ones on a D20 with the word Jeff as a wedding gift. People know Jeff Chapman. People love Jeff Chapman. People don't know Jeff Chapman. I know Jeff Chapman. Anyway, so that group still gets together. They were talking about whether they would do first or second edition. They're going to continue with first edition. Will, who will be jamming Emerald Spire, has put together a group largely consisting of the people that were playing in the Curse of the Crimson Throne game that got canceled. And even though this is a perfect time to jump into a second edition game, he just wants to keep doing first edition. And my friend Leia and I were talking the other day. She's turning 40 in a couple of weeks. I'm sure she doesn't mind me telling the public this. And she didn't have any plans for a big birthday thing. So I was like, well, I could run a Pathfinder game. She's a big Dungeons & Dragons player. She doesn't know Pathfinder super well, but she knows 3.5 D&D. So she's like, I'll play Pathfinder as long as it's first edition. So I'm getting all these gaming opportunities that weren't there not long ago. And yet it just all seems to be the organic gaming opportunities I'm getting are first edition games. And there's no Pathfinder Society scene right now in Montreal, first or second edition. And so the only chance that there is one is if Will and I execute some plans that we have to bring Pathfinder Society back to Montreal. But Will's the one who wanted to do Emerald Spire in first edition. So it would be something I'd actually have to poke him into the second edition direction for. So I contacted the officer of Ottawa. He might be anyway, it's Glenn Shackleton. He is a venture officer, and Ottawa is the biggest, as far as I know, Pathfinder Society area in Canada. And so I was asking him, like, what is your take on this? Are you seeing any interest in second edition? And he said, yes. First edition is completely flipped over to second edition in his area. There's a lot of interest. His big thing now is like trying to get GMs for tutorial tables and to get all the second edition interest met with second edition tables.
And that's what happened.
And you're nodding your head there. So what's your second edition experience?
All the local Pathfinder groups became second edition groups, except for the groups that are finishing up campaigns. Pathfinder Society is going great. We played so much we ran out of material. I had to cancel this coming Saturday's game because we don't got nothing to play. Everybody's played everything.
You can run homebrew stuff, even if you're Pathfinder Society, if you're just looking for a game. Well, I know it's absurd to you, but
so we'll have an alternate plan for next time if this happens again, but I expected 1-04 to be out by now, and it hasn't come out yet. And that was what we were going to play. And because we had to cancel 2 days before it, I don't have time to make an alternate plan happen and get that communicated. But we will do that next time. We will find something to make sure that on Pathfinder Society Day, something will happen. But this is the one time we're going to have to just say, sorry, gang, you played it all.
That's a bummer. What about the evergreens, the replayables?
We will do that again. That might become the alternate plan. But, the replayable means new characters, means coming up with new characters, or a whole lot of people playing pre-gens through an adventure they've played before.
You are saying it means new characters. Like, that's not one of the best parts about the game.
It is, but I need to give them more than 2 days to make them.
Do you?
Some of them, yeah. I love my players, but some of them need help.
All right, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm glad that the interest in like that my experience is just kind of anomalous because I do definitely get the impression second edition is being embraced and that it is out there.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is that lately in the role playing game culture seems to be embracing the rules even if you don't have a chance to play the game. And I think that's why the rise of actual play popularity, because
Mm-hmm.
once you become familiar with a game, if you get a surrogate game and you never actually get to play, knowing the rules makes those games feel better. Those games make you feel like you have a group. And so you feel like you are a Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons player or whatever without actually having at table experiences.
Well, we get a lot of that just from our own fans. Like a surprising number of our fans write in that they don't get to play the game. They don't have groups. Getting, getting 3 to 5 people together as an adult on a regular basis to play a game for several hours at a time is not an easy thing to do. Even with online tools, playing online, this game getting easier to play than ever, still not. Just real life and adulthood gets in the way.
Yes, I very much am familiar with that experience. But it's also was one of the reasons I was wondering if that first edition, second edition disparity that I was seeing might be that it's just Pathfinder's a 10-year-old game. Maybe it appeals to people that are 10 years older than they were when they first became Pathfinder players.
Right. Plus, it's a game that they probably know because it's basically 20 years of chance that you have learned this system at least once. And Pathfinder 2's only been out a month, and I don't know about the availability of the books in your area, but but I get the opinion you get books significantly later than I get books.
I don't keep track of that.
Mm-hmm. So it just like there's a lot of factors at play there. It could also all tabletop gaming is incredibly regional because it usually takes what I call locally alpha gamers to make games.
No, that's the term.
I
believe that's more than just your term. I think that's what people call it.
Mm-hmm. So, like, when I manage the game store or when I'm helping out with the game store, depending on whether or not we'll have tournaments depends on what our trust is in the dependability of the alpha gamer involved. And it doesn't sound like you all have an alpha gamer for second.
I was the alpha gamer. And actually, there was a wave of interest in Pathfinder Society in Montreal before me. And I know some of those alpha gamers, and sometimes they would pop by the games that I was organizing. But by then, they'd played everything, and they were just more interested in just seeing what the new crop of interest in Pathfinder Society was. Mm-hmm. And then after I got out of Pathfinder Society, somebody stepped up and took the officer position, but as far as I know, never actually organized a public game and is no longer in that position.
Well, y'all need a new alpha gamer, or you need to step up, Brian.
I have considered it, but at this point, I'd just like to get a regular home game again, which is what this Emerald Spire is looking like it's going to be, but it's also it's low plot. It's Emerald Spire. It's a super dungeon. There could be plot depending on what Will brings into it, and there's options written out in the book, but I'm actually not looking for that. I'm happy with the idea that we might play once every couple of months, and I don't have to keep track of anything other than that I'm mono hombre. And so in a couple of years, I do think I can get another regular home game going, and everything in my home life will have settled into a place where I can have a regular evening game like this. But for now, the best I can hope for is these sporadic games, plus adventurous, of course.
Mm-hmm. Man, adventurous is great. But
yes, adventurous is
speaking
great.
Of dungeon crawls with plot.
Yes.
Age of Ashes. I've been having a blast with Age of Ashes.
Awesome. Go on.
So, Age of Ashes with Hell Knight Hill is primarily a dungeon crawl adventure. The forenamed Hell Knight Hill is the dungeon. For reasons that I won't spoil, the adventurers have to go up there and explore it and figure out what in the world's going on, because this big old ancient ruin has stuff going on that's not supposed to be happening, and they've got to investigate Hell Knight Hill. But even though it is a pretty cool dungeon crawl with a lot of fun locations, there's a lot of plot going on because it has characters that the players get to interact with fairly frequently through it. I don't want to spoil the individual encounters, but there's both characters that they can meet that will tag along with them until certain goals are met. Just characters that they will run into that are very flavorful and fun to talk to and play with. And just my players are all getting, like, some of these players are straight up murder hobos a lot of the times in my games, and everybody's just getting into character. Everybody is staying in character and role playing it and chatting with these NPCs that they're meeting because of how well they're written. A lot of it's a bit silly. This would really appeal to your style of gaming, I'm guessing. It reminds me of something you might have written, Ryan.
Oh, fun.
It's actually written by Amanda.
Who is the writer?
Amanda Hammond. Okay. So, disclosure, she plays with us on Stellar. But she wrote this, and I'm super happy with it.
Cool. I did read the character guide because I was mostly interested in how backgrounds were going to work with the campaign, with the adventure paths, which they do work well, but also because backgrounds became a lot more generic than I was worried they would be. And so the idea that you're swapping out the generic background for a plot specific one while also having the option of just sticking with one of the generic ones, that worked out for me. Yeah, but from what I read, it was mostly there's like the Gathering Adventurers. I believe that might even be what it was called. Like the whole adventure starts with a fairly generic, you all meet in a city for adventuring.
Yeah.
It was like, this is like wonderfully on the nose. Like, what a great way to start an adventure. It's just like such a classic, simple premise, but like written, it was self-aware and it was written a little tongue-in-cheek and all in good fun. So I do pick up elements of what you're talking about of why this is the kind of thing that I would enjoy. I am surprised it leads to a dungeon crawl, though. Although I guess now that you've told me that, I can see the connecting dots. I just wouldn't have anticipated them.
Right. And I have a feeling that this AP is going to open up a lot more than just a dungeon crawl, but it definitely starts with one. And it is all tongue-in-cheek. All the characters you meet are really just a little bit over the top, and they all have very role-playable characteristics that a GM can just really dig their teeth into. And it's a little bit silly, and it is a bit self-aware. This is an adventure that was written knowing that gamers were going to play it, not storytellers. So maybe it's not the one to go to if you want something very super serious and grimdark. But if you want some lighthearted fantasy romping, this is totally on point. We're having so much fun with it. It shows off the system really well, too. And it's just stock full of characters that I can do really fun voices and have really funny interactions with in the middle of these dungeons. And lots of opportunity for very clever players to do things clever in dungeons too. So it's everything I love.
You are definitely making me interested in this adventure. I do also remember from the guide, and it might also be something that was covered in a lot of the talks leading up to the release of Age of Ashes, that each book was going to prominently feature one of the core ancestries.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is the Goblin book.
Yes, it is totally goblins right away.
Okay, well, that goes very well with what you were just saying about it being wacky antics.
I have role-played a lot of different goblins.
Oh, good.
Yeah. This is also, I don't want to spoil it, but you don't do a lot of killing of goblins.
No, this, if I understood, one of the intents was to really make people embrace the idea of goblins as a playable race and as something other than the kill on sight not backstory, but history that they had in the game and in all games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my players have all adopted their favorite goblin, and it's gonna, yeah.
Well, I'm going to be entering Emerald Spire, which I know, since we played the first level already, starts with a bunch of goblins that I am supposed to be killing.
Yeah. Murder those goblins because they will murder you. All right. So there's another thing. I wanted to talk about is I picked up a new accessory that
Go on.
is wonderful and is not really all that new, but I want to totally recommend it because I found it to be awesome. So,
Well, hold on. Is this more of a shout out?
no,
Okay.
it's a thing I crafted.
Ooh.
And by crafted, I just mean cut it with scissors.
Ooh.
So, all right. So, I noticed immediately that this dungeon crawl had lots of cool rooms and stuff, and I wanted to do the thing I've seen before and have done a couple of times before. And I wanted to it was like, I'm tired of drawing all these rooms. Let's just get the whole map printed. And I did not have access to a large format printer, but I did have access to a color laser printer, so I could at least print off each page. So to get the map printed correctly, I did the following steps. First, I measured the inches of, I measured a tile to see how many inches it was, and then upscaled it appropriately to be the right size. So at least the JPEG was this many inches by this many inches. There's a few different techniques for that. I use Photoshop, so it was just simply, I want to print this at 300 DPI. That's dots per inch. This tile is 70 some pixels. Multiply math. Make it so where the tiles are now 300 pixels wide. But before I did that, I exported the JPEG from the PDF file and then took it to a program called Waifu 2X. Have I told you about Waifu 2X before?
Waifu as a word sounds familiar.
Waifu is kind of it's not a great word. It's in the anime fandom, it means wife, and it's usually meant to be, this is my favorite anime girl. She is mine. It's kind of like, I'm obsessed with this anime girl. She is my waifu.
Apparently, descriptivist in chat knows exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, any anime fan knows what the term waifu is. So there's this program called Waifu 2X. It exists in the world before there was high-res art of a lot of anime, to take screenshots of low-res DVD anime and then blow it up big using an algorithm that using an AI algorithm that did much better job of upscaling it than your computer will. It works really great for illustrated art. But I've learned a long time ago that using this program for any drawing, any illustration, will produce great upscaling that looks nice with none of that like weird blotchy JPEG artifacting or anything like that. It does stylize it a little bit as it increases it, but it does a really great job as long as you're dealing with illustration. All maps are illustrated usually. So threw this into Waifu 2X, told it the exact, blew it up to the right size, went to Photoshop, resized it, saved it as a PDF, and then used Adobe PDF printer to print this thing out as a poster. So it would just divide the image up into the right size, then cut them out, and then just use a little bit of tape to tape them together in the right thing. But then you have a kind of bumpy map with seams in it. And if you tape it really carefully, you don't see the seams. But to make this even better, I went to my local hobby store. I got the little clear vinyl layers that I think the intended purpose is to make couch covers out of this stuff. At least that's what the
At your
pictures.
local hobby store?
Yeah. So you can get this clear vinyl roll that they basically, you go to the fabric section and you can roll this off. It's just clear vinyl sheets.
We are thinking of different kinds of hobby stores.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Yeah. So like an art store.
Like a big one.
Okay.
Yeah. Like an arts and craft hobby store, not a RC and trains hobby store.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So go to the fabric section, get this vinyl fabric or vinyl sheeting. And I got a bunch of that, enough to cover my table. And then I just throw that down on my game table behind me. You can see it behind me, actually. I've got it set up right now. And just cover the table. We slide the map under it. And so we've got, and it kind of even hides the seams. It makes it all lay flat. You can write on it with marker. So I've got basically and it was like $6 for way too much of that vinyl than I needed. I covered my entire 7.5 foot by 4.5 foot game table here, and I still have as much of that stuff left over for $6. And
Wow.
then printing off the maps was just elbow grease in the on the laser printer I had access to. And so we now have full to scale dungeon to crawl around on. But Fog of War, right? Fog of War. You don't want to just let them
Fog of
see all.
War.
So what I did with that is I just got little construction paper squares, and I intend to get little construction paper wafers as soon as I can get them in from Amazon. And I just covered the whole map with these like little squares that are like a couple inches wide. I think like 4 inches, 3 inches. So I covered the whole map with these, just scattered them around, and then just push them out of the way a little bit when they get to the next room. And I just like shuffle them off away. And it actually looks like a Fog of War that they're exploring through. And it means that they can explore the whole dungeon without seeing it all at once. And then when they explore enough, I just gather up the cardboard squares, stack them back up in the corner, and wait until they get to the next level.
So a local player, Caroline Salambe, I believe is her name. Salambe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she did that for one of the Montreal Pathfinder Society games. She laid out the map, told people not to pay attention, and then just scattered a whole bunch of, I don't know, like 2-inch diameter circles of construction paper. And as she revealed it, she was just like, well, you reveal one. Okay, you can see that there's more. And she would just like naturally lift up the parts to the floor that you uncovered. And it worked super well. And it was super easy to run, which is what impressed me the most. Is she just scattered it and then lifted it as she needed. I really like your idea of pushing it back, because that does feel a little more organic and a little bit more like fog. So that's a cool way of like really selling that idea. But I've seen that tool used before, and it's a super effective tool.
Yeah, and it's super cheap, like a $6 for the vinyl. You get your map of anyway. It's a flip map, it's a whatever. You don't map, you print it out. Go get a draft print. You can get real cheap prints here if you get them printed as blueprint printers. You can get big maps printed in black and white, so you gotta color them. So spend some time with crayon, people, and you can get your map colored. That's another way of doing it real cheap. Or do it this way and just print them off on your home printer and cut them out in tiles. And the wafers were just another couple of bucks for 500 of them. So nothing. The whole cost of this was nothing. And I did it on, I decided I was going to do this at 3 p.m. while I was at work. And went to my my print store, got the map printed, went to the hobby store, got the supplies. I couldn't find the wafers at the hobby store, which is why I have the construction paper squares instead of circles. I want circles. Actually, they make little wafers that are like little bit of cardstock that have like actual like cloud like rims. I want those.
Oh, fun.
Then it will look like fog. But even then, like I've got less than $10 total into this solution. And it's been fantastic, easy way to explore this dungeon.
Awesome. Bastille in chat is saying make a YouTube tutorial about it. And he even says content.
Maybe I will do just that, Bastille.
You can tell Bastille's a long-time listener.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm out of stuff to chat about.
So the reason I brought up Mono Hombre is because I've actually got very different builds for him. Maybe I'll put it off and we'll talk about making the same character completely different ways and how you deal with that. We'll talk about that in a future episode.
Yep.
Speaking of future episodes, we've brought up PFS a couple of times here. We've got an upcoming episode where we're going to be talking about the new person responsible for PFS. I don't know exactly how we are talking about his title, but we'll move on to shoutouts and then we can talk about what's coming up in future episodes.
All right, everyone.
We'll be wrapping things up right after this.
Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups and shoutouts.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 208 of the No Direction Podcast, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. Before we go, a couple of things we want to bring your attention to. I actually don't have any shout-outs in my little collection of shout-outs here. I mean, I guess Plunderlings was a Kickstarter that I had shouted out to in the past. It's still going on. and it is now funded. So if you want to check out more goblins, including the translucent goblin stretch goals, that's always fun.
Mm-hmm.
Perram, do you have anything you want to shout out to, or should we just move on to business?
Move on to business.
Excellent. So as I was just mentioning, we are going to have Michael Sayer on the podcast for the first time in an upcoming episode. We've actually got a very busy October. And if you're wondering why we're talking about October already, it's because September 18th is actually much deeper into September than you might realize. I keep thinking that we should have another episode in September, but next week we've got a Beyond schedule, I believe.
Yes, the Alien Archive 3 one that had to get moved. And then we might have another Beyond on October 9th with, I don't want to mention who, but with a guest from Paizo that may, the way the scheduling's been, I don't want to say who it is yet, but we may have another one very soon after that. And if not, then we'll have it. Anyway, the next after that is
next week is the 25th. The week after it is already October 2nd, and that's going to be the first of 3 No Direction Primes in October, which is good because October is supposed to be a busy month. We've got the playtest is supposed to launch in October. We've got the character guide that we're going to be reviewing. We've got this interview with Michael Sayer that we'd like to, do. There was another thing in October that we wanted to do, wasn't there?
Monster Creation
Rules PDF. It's not a playtest. It's not a preview. It's if you want to create monsters, you're getting the rules earlier, but they will be officially published and printed in the Game Mastery Guide, which won't be coming out until November, which means we've already got some November content
until
February. Oh, January, right, or beyond. That's right. It was pushed back.
Yeah.
Frankly, Perram, I'm okay not having that many more reviews in our immediate future. We've had some really interesting books and a lot of things to talk about lately. But now that the World Guide is done, it feels like the character guide's already upon us.
Right.
And then it'll be nice to breathe after the character guide's done.
And we haven't even gotten into other topics that are pretty obvious things we would want to talk about that we're not going to say here because that's promising content that we haven't promised yet.
Right. And especially because it's probably November content we're talking about. And that's not even next month. I do like being a couple of weeks ahead of schedule, but we are scheduled so far ahead at this point, and none of it is just desire. It's all need-based content. So anyway, it's all like, it's not that the desire is not there. It's going to be fun content when we cover it.
Right.
It's just, October came together very much on its own, and I am very glad that there is 5 Wednesdays, 3 of which will be No Direction Wednesdays in October.
Mm-hmm.
Ready to wrap things up?
I am.
All right. Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.